This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
From McLean's.ca, a mystery story. On January 22nd, 1990, by Barbara Wickens. For 15 years, Michael Ray Porter had quietly lived in Western Canada, marrying a Canadian woman, Catherine, with whom he raised 3 children. According to his lawyer, James Brimacombe, Porter was watching television in his home near Edmonton earlier this month when he saw a program that was to shatter his comfortable life. Brimacombe said that Porter stumbled upon part of a repeat episode of the popular NBC show Unsolved Mysteries, which deals with a variety of subjects, including outstanding crimes. The program featured the case of David Harry Fisher, who escaped from a Washington state prison in September of 1974 after serving 4 years of a 20-year sentence. Fisher admitted that Porter was the alias that he had adopted when he arrived in Canada after his escape. As a result, Brimacombe said that Fisher, aka Porter, was not surprised when the RCMP arrived at his door the day after the broadcast and arrested him. Fisher's case is not unusual. According to television producers and law enforcement and federal immigration spokesmen, at least 8 other wanted U.S. criminals have been apprehended in Canada as a result of Unsolved Mysteries and a similar U.S. program, America's Most Wanted, which air in Canada and feature reenactments of crimes. More than 100 arrests in the United States have resulted from the 2 shows. After a deportation hearing early last week, an immigration official and an RCMP officer handed Fisher over to U.S. authorities in Seattle just 6 days after his January 4th arrest. Fisher, who was convicted of manslaughter in 1971 for the killing of a 13-year-old Tacoma, Washington girl, was subsequently taken to Seattle's Pierce County Jail, where investigators from various law enforcement agencies questioned him. Brimacombe said that he did not know where Fisher would serve the rest of his prison sentence, or exactly how long that sentence would be. That would depend, he said, on what new charges were laid, and whether U.S. authorities considered the fact that Fisher had apparently not committed any further crimes while he was a fugitive in Canada. Fisher's was the second arrest in Canada attributed to Unsolved Mysteries, a popular hour-long program produced in Los Angeles that features stories involving psychic phenomenon, lost loved ones, searches for missing heirs, as well as unsolved crimes. The show, which began as a series of irregularly scheduled specials on NBC in 1987 in the United States, became a weekly series in September of 1988. Ranked in the top 10, it is now seen on 200 stations across North America, including Edmonton's CFRN. The first arrest in Canada, resulting from the series, took place in November of 1988 when police in London, Ontario, arrested Joseph Arlen Shepard, who was wanted in Tennessee for the 1978 rape and murder of 2 teenage girls. After watching an installment of Unsolved Mysteries, a neighbor identified Shepard, who had been living under the name of James Joseph Tripp for 4 years and lived with a common-law wife and her 3 children. Shepard's lawyers argued that he should not be returned to Tennessee, where the district attorney had demanded the death penalty. The lawyers also claimed that by attempting to deport Shepard, federal officials were really carrying out a disguised form of extradition, and that Ottawa can refuse extradition unless it is assured that the death penalty will not be carried out. In October of 1989, Mr. Justice Alan Austin of the Ontario Supreme Court ruled that the arguments were invalid. Immigration officials returned Shepard to U.S. authorities on December the 16th. The Fox network's America's Most Wanted has led to at least 6 arrests in Canada, including 2 in New Brunswick and 4 in Vancouver. One of the most notorious criminals was convicted rapist and escape artist Frederick Merrill, who was arrested in New Brunswick in July of 1988. Merrill, who was sent to Toronto, subsequently sparked a massive manhunt there when he escaped from the city's Don Jail. In Fisher's case, Brimacombe said that his client client expected to be arrested after he saw Unsolved Mysteries. Brimacombe said that Fisher told me that he was flicking channels on the TV set and saw enough to realize what the show was about. He quickly flicked the channel again because his wife and children were in the room with him. Other Edmonton viewers had seen the show when it was originally broadcast on December the 6th. The program showed 15-year-old photographs of Fisher and a computer-generated portrait of how he might look now. A viewer recognized the man in the portrait and telephoned the RCMP. Fisher's arrest in Edmonton concluded a saga that began in 1970 when he was charged with the first-degree murder of Laura Lee Burbank, a 13-year-old from Tacoma, Washington, whose body was found 3 months after she had disappeared. Fisher was subsequently convicted on a reduced charge of manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years. He escaped from the minimum security Walla Walla State Prison in Walla Walla, Washington on September 1st, 1974, and a few days later he fled to Canada. He lived in Manitoba, British Columbia, and for the past 3 years in the Edmonton area. Brimacombe described the traumatic effect that the arrest has had on the family. To avoid reporters, Catherine Porter, Fisher's wife of 11 years, and their children, aged 5, 7, and 10, fled from their home in the East End Edmonton suburb of Shorewood Park. But Brimacombe said that his client was relieved to being discovered. He realized it was now time to go back and serve the rest of his sentence, said the lawyer. As Fisher and other fugitives have found, any nation plugged into American television can no longer be considered a safe haven.
So there's a couple of things that have come up as we peruse through missing people and unsolved homicides in Colorado. One thing that we've sort of consistently talked about, and we're going to talk about a little bit today, is the avalanche of cases that are being solved through DNA, how great that is. But we look for similarities in cases, and the case we're going to talk about with the DNA, it's a good example of how we can always be wrong, I think. I never formed an opinion of that case, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. As I was looking through the missing people in Colorado, and I just opened it wide open, and there's, I think, 376 people that are missing from Colorado. And that's like of all time. It's no time limit and no age limit. And I've said on the show before, I spend some of my free time trying to make matches of people, following circumstances. And if you use NamUs to any sort of extent, when you first get on NamUs, the homepage, once you log in, it gives you random people. Sometimes it'll give you the latest ones. And then sometimes it's just whoever pops up. And one of my favorite things to do is try to figure out where that person is. As I was looking through missing persons cases in Colorado, and I was in the 70s and then the 80s, and I get to Georgia Lee Ronner. And at the very bottom, one of her distinctive characteristics is a tattoo of a flower on her right hand. She has a rose. And I thought, oh, there's a body. There's a body that's got that. And so if you look in Colorado for found bodies, it's 80 something, right? So you're looking at like 376 missing people and 80 some bodies.
Georgia Lee Ronner was last seen in Pagosa Springs, Colorado, sometime in July of 1986. She lived there, but worked at a convenience store in New Mexico. Her employer, Anthony James Mimern, who went by his middle name, gave conflicting accounts of her disappearance. He stated that he'd driven her to the airport so she could fly to California, and also that she'd driven to California on a motorcycle. Ronner has relatives in California. After her disappearance, Mimern and another person went to her apartment and cleaned out her belongings, including makeup and toiletries. Mimern shot his estranged wife in Clingman, Arizona in 2001. She survived, and he was charged with attempted murder. In January of 2002, while awaiting trial, he hanged himself in his jail cell. He remains the prime suspect in Ronner's disappearance. Her case remains unsolved, and foul play is suspected.
And that's over the life of what's available in NamUs. And so, I go back through, I'm looking for the body. No idea if the body's going to match or if the body, and when I say match, I mean the other characteristics involved. All I know is that the flower tattoo on the hand but it sticks out. I find the body. It's a body that's found in the early part of summer in 1987. And everything matches. It's slightly taller than Georgia was reported to be. The postmortem interval is approximately a year, which it would line up with when she disappeared. And she does, in fact, have a flower tattoo on the right hand. And so it's, I think, about 4 hours north, maybe, of where she was last seen. Everything lines up except the height is slightly off. I'm like, oh, that's a match. Why hasn't anybody made that match? We talked about in Matches Known Only to God, we talked about how these little tiny things can really throw off the reuniting of unidentified found bodies with their identity. Just little tiny things that, if it were only different, they would have identified it so much sooner. And so I make this match and I send it over to John, and John is like, oh, wow, you found Georgia. And it's pretty obvious to us. And then, of course, doing due diligence, we encounter yet another interesting side of this whole sort of crusade that we find ourselves on. And what that side is that, of course, people have made this connection online. And as John shared with me, it has been said that they've been ruled out. And the source of the rule out, it's people who should know better, honestly. And then we also find out that a family member of the missing person, she or he was in contact with the case manager of the unidentified body, and they haven't been ruled out. So it's this back and forth of disaster, basically. And I don't say this lightly. I really don't. If our unidentified person is not Georgia Lee Ronner, I will do a backflip. Okay, that's how and I can't do a backflip.
I suppose I should video that film and put it on our Instagram.
Well, I'm not going to have to do it because it's her. And I get it that people have said, these law enforcement or these agencies that deal with these people, they've said that they've been ruled out. So I did find out there are sources for DNA from Georgia Lee Ronner's family. Now, it's weird that they don't have DNA already in the system. And so you run into this sort of next level annoyance because, like I said, I wouldn't say I'm going to do a backflip if it's not her, if I wasn't really, really sure. And I understand that I could possibly be wrong, at which time I would be required to do a backflip. And I'm okay with that because the overall circumstances of this case and the unidentified body. Okay, so you have to keep in mind, it's to the point now where I remember little things about bodies and about people. Little things like when I read that there's a flower tattooed on somebody's hand, and I find a body that's got a flower on its hand, that I go, wait, I know that. And by the way, it's a DNA rule out, not a dental record rule out, not I don't think it's her rule out. It's a DNA rule out that I will accept.
Oh, that's the requirement for the backflip? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, yes. It's a DNA rule. It's not somebody saying they've ruled her out. It's a actual rule out. And like I said, I hope that whoever you had sent me something over, and I hope whoever that is her niece or nephew, I hope that they will get their DNA into the system to be cross-checked with unidentified bodies. Because it sounds like, so just from what I read, it does sound like she's got at least 2 siblings. And so with 2 siblings, you could get like a whole profile to identify someone.
Or you could get it really close with one. I mean, so a sibling would not necessarily rule out. For the most part, as long as it's a full sibling, you should be able to at least do enough of a comparison to close out an investigation. But here's the thing about these cases, because somebody has run down another case similar to this with Amanda Fravel, but your point was her tattoo was on the wrong hand. Amanda Lee Fravel moved from her home state of California to Las Vegas, Nevada in 1985. She stayed with a friend and her friend's family at first, then moved into a place of her own, but found that too expensive and moved in with a roommate. She had a job at a Taco Bell restaurant. In June of 1986, her mother sent her money so she could come home to Rancho Cordova, California, to visit. Fravel never arrived in California, however. She was last seen on June 13, 1986. Her roommate, Lou Frank, said she left their apartment on South 3rd Street, planning to pick up her paycheck at Taco Bell and visit her ex-boyfriend. Fravel had no vehicle, and it's unclear what her means of transportation was that day. There are reports that she was a frequent hitchhiker, but a friend said she had stopped hitchhiking entirely by the time she disappeared, after she had a bad experience. She never arrived at either of her destinations, and has never been heard from again. A few weeks after Fravel's disappearance, her mother and stepfather came to Las Vegas to investigate her case. They met with her ex-boyfriend and with her roommate. All of Fravel's things in the apartment were packed up, and her 2 kittens had reportedly not been fed or cared for since she went missing. Fravel is described as a caring pet owner who would not have willingly left her kittens without food. Fravel's mother and stepfather and her friend were all suspicious of Frank. He appeared to be in his late 40s in 1986, and many of the visitors to the apartment were much younger people. He stated he was from Georgia, although he spoke without any discernible accent, and said he had come to Nevada to open up a brothel. There's no record of Frank in Nevada state records. It's possible the name Lou Frank was an alias. His current whereabouts are unknown, and he has never been named as a suspect in Fravel's disappearance. Fravel had an unhappy home and family life and a chaotic upbringing in California, and although her mother had purchased her a plane ticket to go back there, her friend said she thought Fravel would have never returned home due to the unfortunate circumstance there. Fravel reportedly told her friend she wanted to go to Canada to meet a musician who lived there. Foul play is suspected in Fravel's case. Her disappearance remains unsolved.
Right. And so, yeah, she had and I am just slightly familiar with that, but I didn't go back and check, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. Hers is on the left hand.
I believe all of that lines up. I'm still doing the due diligence on part of this. So I was constructing the information to put in a tip because I like to make the tips very thorough, very pointed. They have links.
I don't think you need to really make the tip anymore.
No, I can see that, on no less than 5 different places online in the last year and a half, people have started talking about the unidentified doe that you're talking about, and they've started talking about Georgia's case. And so talking about her case and them talking about the doe, I think that this match will, if it's a match, will eventually be made without me having to do all that. But that's the reason I do the due diligence. I don't like to duplicate tips. I don't like to come across things where there's rule outs. But I want to point something out here, and that is that in cases like this, this was a unique one in a way because I was able to read 3 or 4 people's different perspectives on it. One of the most interesting parts of the differing perspectives was who they talked to and what the person told them. Because this took place over 2 Colorado counties. One county had the missing persons case, and one county had custody of the unidentified remains. And in addition to that, it is a CBI case, technically, although where it all sort of is stored presently is in NamUs. Depending on the person that you talk to in the midst of this, you might hear that the dental records didn't match. That came from the Doe Network. The Doe Network said that the dental records didn't match.
And they said they didn't just, okay, and this is it's third party.
So when I then try to back up that online person's assessment that the Doe Network is saying that this person's dental records don't match, what I find is this person has not been excluded yet. But in an initial comparison, they stopped doing more work because the dental records they had representing the missing person did not match the dental records that they had representing the unidentified person. However, the work has not necessarily stopped at the county level because depending on what detective is currently assigned to the cold case depends on what resources are being dedicated to the cases. So the person doing the write-up on the internet, they interpreted the Doe Network stopping their work as being posited as an exclusion. But when I go back and read what the Doe Network has to say on it, it just looks like they are actually trying to figure out if they will be able to gather enough information to confirm if the dental records are accurate and whether or not a DNA profile exists for both sides of it. Now, I can tell you that DNA does exist from the body that was collected in 1987, but I can't tell you if DNA exists on the other side. It appears that it does based on what Meg said, the third-party information that we're able to look at. So in theory, as long as they've got a living relative, whether they have her DNA or not, doesn't matter. They could make a match to this body if this body turns out to be Georgia. My point in all of that is this. First of all, this gets into county territory in Colorado, and counties are where the problems come in. The average U.S. county has a land area of around 600 to 625 square miles. Okay, that's across the U.S. There are over 3,000 counties in the U.S. The counties that we're dealing with here in these Colorado cases, they have upwards of 1,000 square miles each. One of them has 1,300 and the other one has almost 2,000 square miles. When you get into situations like that, it's weird because your population expands and contracts, expands and contracts. Colorado is a tourist area. The normal population that the resources are designated for are somewhere between 1,300 and 5,000 people. But when tourist season is in play in any given county, those populations swell to 40, 50, 60,000 people. And the resources that normally would be dedicated in a sheriff's department, which covers one county, have to suddenly go from handling, under 10,000 people to sometimes handling almost 100,000 people in the more popular ski areas. And just to put that into perspective, the U.S. population is concentrated in just 143 counties of the 3,000 counties that exist out there. My focus on Colorado has been because the resources there do not match the number of missing persons. And as Meg said, it's in the 300s right now. And depending on which database you read in, it is between 315 and 412 missing persons in Colorado right now, open cases. So not all missing people are reported. And the other problem that comes about in Colorado is they were not necessarily early adopters of collecting vital evidence in missing persons cases. So the year that we landed on is 1986 with George's case. But one of the reasons that's so important is that's as DNA was technically in its infancy in terms of forensic and criminal use. We didn't know that we should be collecting hairbrushes and toothbrushes and all of the things a missing person might have left behind. So we're left to use a finite resource, and that is familial DNA matching. And that's one of the reasons that it's so important that there are citizen sleuths and web sleuths and missing persons researchers out there, is because them putting their eyes on cases like Georgia and this unidentified person will be the things that eventually make these matches where in areas where the resources were so scant that they didn't necessarily collect everything they needed along the way. And I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I wanted to get all of that in so we had it on recording.
I find I completely understand what you're saying, and I don't disagree with it. But I feel like the age-old problem with now, missing people is one thing. We've talked about it at length before, that missing people are not automatically law enforcement territory.
Yes, I agree.
It takes a special set of circumstances. The way it sort of evolved is runaways and people who've walked away from their life and people who left and committed suicide and anything that is non-criminal. Children, they are almost always, even if they're runaways, they are still sort of law enforcement. They're law enforcement's territory. But so with missing people, fine, I get it. Resources are limited. But with found bodies,
It's very complicated.
No, it's law enforcement.
But it's still very complicated to be able to get law enforcement everything they need to do matching. That's one of the reasons NamUs is so important.
Well, and so Colorado has 80 some found bodies at the moment, officially listed in NamUs. That's it, 80 some bodies. Okay. Now, just in a brief moment, and I didn't go search and see like, oh, is this match been made? Which, you do that. And that's fine. And you said, oh, it'll get solved eventually. And it may, because of the niece or nephew, mentioning that they spoke with whoever had custody of the body. They spoke with them. And so if they can push the right buttons and stay present in the situation, like I could call them up and say, hey, this is her, this is her, this is her. I'm not a relative. I'm on a podcast. And apparently that could, they would just say, you need to mind your business.
Well, I've been using the word journalist, and they for the most part I've been able to get the information I want, but some of the so the reason I came back to this is I got a negative response on this case. And it was very curt and short, but that's what made me go, okay, they've seen this already. And that's what really made me go hunting, because all I asked was, can you tell me who is currently assigned to this case? And the response I got was, no, I can't. So I was like, at first I thought it was going to be one of these things where...
This particular case? Which side did you go in from?
The Georgia side.
So nobody is responsible for it. That's the answer to that. Nobody's looking into it.
Well, so I was able to find out there is an officer assigned to this case, but that took a minute. And I don't think this is the reason I was looking more and more. Like ordinarily what I saw wouldn't make me stop. In this case, I felt like somebody else was talking to me. And like I said, I found multiple people looking to see if this was a link between this Fremont County body and this Archuleta County missing person. And the Fremont coroner has the body. So that's an easy thing. You don't have to do much there. But the contact at NamUs was someone I knew. It's someone I've talked to before. It's the police department. It's not even a police department. It's a sheriff's agency. It's a very small sheriff's agency. And they did not want to address it any further and even give me a name. And that's not completely unusual that you run into that. And like you said, if I was a family member, I might have got a little further. But in this instance, I had already pulled the journalist card because that's just been the easiest way to move forward. Because the next thing that happens in most of these cases I have problems with is I know how to file a FOIA request. And that's what they think of.
Right. But so with an unidentified person, you can't possibly be family until they figure out who it is. I mean, really.
Right. That's what I'm saying. I started on the missing person side.
So yes, missing people, they aren't necessarily law enforcement territory. Law enforcement knows that. You've got to have like some pretty serious blood spatter involved to get movement on a case immediately.
Well, the guy that's actually on the case, though, I think the reason they were protecting him is he's very busy. He's a cold case investigator. He looks to be retired, and he has solved multiple cases, which is why I was like, you know what, I'm going to back off of this for a moment, look around on the internet, and I'm not going to bother this guy because he and I'm not saying solved multiple cases like right now, but in the past, I'd say past 10 or 12 years, he has solved at least 8 cold cases. Cold cases that I definitely respect his work looking at him, like looking at his record. I don't necessarily think that. I think that this case would probably suck up resources that he normally wouldn't dedicate it to, which is one of my points that I wanted to mention to you. I am starting to get the distinct impression that even though these cases are very old, there is still some weird kind of prioritization. I don't know what the word would be.
The priorities are out of order.
Yeah, like the oldest missing persons cases that might be the easiest to solve. If it happens to be like this woman was apparently Georgia was mixed up in, shenanigans. And apparently that puts her lower on the list than like children, which I don't really have an opinion as to whether that's the right approach or not. I think it comes into play that people have personal biases and they use those biases in how they prioritize their work. And some people just like look at it and they're like, oh, it's a kid, I got to solve that case. But like some of these children cases are unsolvable.
I watched a show the other day and I have no idea what it was and it really doesn't matter. But my husband was watching it with me, and the detective was doing like a really good job. And he's like, just because it's a prostitute murder doesn't mean it's any less in my book. And, prostitutes, they were doing what they had to do to survive. And I look at prostitute murders just like I look at every other murder. And I'm like, well, I think if that were true, you could probably just call it a murder.
Wow.
Instead, because the way if you've
well, you've called me out on that before, though. You've warned me about using words like sex worker and hustler and like different words over.
My point is that if what he was genuinely stating what he was stating, and I get it, okay, but the fact that he was even differentiating it made me go, why does he keep doing that? And I don't know if I'm the only one that sees it. I don't know the resources. And I can't remember the age range on the body that was found in the unincorporated part of the county, okay? But it was young. The age range was young.
Yeah.
It was clearly a crime. So that's law enforcement territory. I don't care what they don't know who that person is. Okay, they don't know. There's unfortunately some stereotypes that go along with situations. When you have family members of missing people who are aware that unidentified bodies are within your organization and you've got pushing happening, then perhaps you're like, well, I got to get this done. And it puts them on a higher priority. And then when you have people who they're mostly alone and their family members don't realize they're gone for quite a while, automatically put them in like a different priority zone. But they have no idea who they have there. So I don't see, there's no reason those 80 bodies should be unidentified. And that's not just in Colorado. There's unidentified bodies everywhere. But this tells me, this case right here that it tells me that not only is nothing being done, okay, there's actually opposition when stuff is trying to be happening. And given the time, the area, everything you could possibly think of, okay, on a grand scale of cases, this body is Georgia, okay? It's absolutely crazy to me that like you Googling it immediately shoots that down, regardless of who's saying it, right?
It doesn't shoot it down for me.
Well, when I see somebody say, oh, I think these are a match, and somebody say, oh, I contacted so-and-so, and they said, no, it's been ruled out. And I go, but that's not possible because I'm sure it's her. And I'm not trying to be a know-it-all. I'm really not. But, and you know what? I feel like, and I've, in other cases, I've said, I could be wrong. I've said, this may not work because of this, that, or the other.
Right.
I've done identifications that I wasn't super sure of, and it's just sort of shooting in the dark, this is her. And how does it not deter you?
Well, like me?
Well, you said you don't take it that way. That's what you
No,
said.
no. Well, so I start looking to see like who they've talked to and who says what about what. And what I found here, it's interesting that we're in Colorado dealing with some of these cases. The person that is investigating the doe, they listen to internet tips. So what I have to do that's different is I have to call him and ask questions. Like I already figured out, like I said, like I don't really want to say his name on here because I don't want him to get bombarded for this. But I already figured out, like looking through what news articles I could find, is that he was very receptive. The other thing about this guy is he works that border that I was talking about between Colorado and New Mexico. And they had a case out there that was a lot like the Sumter Does, where it was two unidentified bodies together. He worked that case back in 2015 and he solved it. And in 2019, he got a suspect in that case, and she got arrested recently and is currently sitting in the Maricopa County Jail. So I just feel like the people that are like giving quick answers. So it went like this. Like I read that somebody had heard from the Doe Network, and I went and looked at it, and it's not exactly true. And you also can't exclude based on dental records in this day and age. But I wanted to go further with that. And someone said that, Fremont County had ruled it out. And then they said that, Archuleta County had ruled it out. So I don't know what's missing there. In order for me to, like, you've done the research, you set up the comparison, and I'm not deterred by anything I find on the internet, but I might have to convince somebody of something. And I might have to talk to somebody and say, I need to see this thing. Or I might actually have to file this area that they're in out there has a pretty short form for FOIA requests. And I've already gone back through and found all the case numbers on this. And I can just look at it and go, okay, let me get the incident report. And you shouldn't get too much pushback on that. Because the thing is, these incident reports, by the time I get to them, they're 35 years old. There's no reason for them not to let me, get a copy of it if they're digitized, or we're right on the border where most of this stuff should be available. If it were 1982 in that area, I would have problems, because that means somebody's got to go dig it out. They haven't digitized everything in Colorado. But this is back to what I was saying about the resource part of things. I think this guy is a good but limited resource. I think he can only have so many cases sitting in front of him at a time. And I'm not deterred at trying to convince him that this is the one to try and compare now.
I think that if somebody needs a win, they should take this case and they should match it, because I promise you it will match.
Well, and I know some of this stuff gets very passionate and temperamental between you and I, but the truth is we both want the same thing, and we don't really care. We want this person who is missing to be found, and we want this person who is unidentified to be identified. That is our goal.
Right. It is. That's it. And it is disheartening to me because it's hard enough to find a match to begin with. I mean, a real match, not one where you're pushing the envelope and saying, well, if it was only a little bit different, right? And I know that. And it's hard enough to find a match, and then to find the match, to report the match. And, I don't report the matches. I report them to you. And you kind of have to take the brunt of it. But the reason is, I don't really want to hear the pushback, because if I've gone to the extent of sharing the information with, and I'm the first to admit if I'm wrong about something, and I don't mind being wrong. It's just when it's so easy to say, okay, there literally is nobody else in a 10-year span that could be this person. Okay. And the reason we have, some of this information is because we are so far in the future from when she went missing and the body was found. Okay. A lot of cases have cleared themselves up between then and now. And so, that is one component that we get to have, the passage of time.
where multiple agencies are involved and NamUs is in the center of all of it. What do you think that it will improve over time or get worse that they have these communication problems?
I don't really see it changing all that much. I have a feeling that people, and it could just be because I do it, but I have a feeling that people get really annoyed at people going, oh, look at this, like, oh, this is that, the other, whatever. And so I'm conscious of that with everything I do, right? And I feel like the majority of jobs involved in the intertwine of these various organizations, right? So law enforcement, NamUs, law enforcement on, whatever level. And then, of course, medical examiners, coroners, whoever else is involved. I feel like it is always going to be a challenge. And I don't know that it's going to get any worse or any better. And I don't think people who do this for a job sit around like I do and look to make matches. I could be wrong. I think so. I feel pretty confident that an automatic cross-reference of DNA samples would just be awesome. And that would really take a lot of the communication problems out of it, because once you get a match, now, of course, that was a lot of work, and you're talking about all over the United States, and you can't even get two law enforcement agencies in one district to communicate effectively with one another. And I'm really terrible at I'm really terrible at trying to communicate with people, because I can't, and I can't use my words the way that I want them to come out. And then it's like, I understand what I'm saying. Why don't you understand what I'm saying? That's basically how that goes.
Well, and you've spent a lot of time and energy here with me, because we've been able to communicate for a really long time on these type topics. And I hear you clearly, but I understand what you're saying. And I think other people, not you necessarily, I think other people have that problem. I was hoping you'd say that, the automatic cross-reference thing, because I agree. I think the automatic cross-reference is the algorithms there. The way that we have gone technology-wise, that's got to be the smartest way to reduce the unidentified population.
Right. And so the holdup on that is going to be, now, I don't think it's going to be an insurmountable holdup, but the holdup on that is you've got cases that there's no chance of getting a DNA sample from some of these missing people. Okay. Now, the reason it's not insurmountable is because, and I don't know if people would be shocked by this or not, but I happen to know it's true, so I'm going to share it. Your DNA profile is yours. However, it's not yours alone to restrict access to. And what I mean by that is when you start when somebody's doing DNA research, the very first person who they get their DNA profile done leads to thousands of other people having part of their DNA out there.
Right.
Okay. And so basically what I'm saying is a couple of people in a family with their DNA done on either, GEDmatch or one of these ancestry type sites. And then you've got DNA profile from a missing person or from a crime scene. And now there's restrictions on how law enforcement can do things. But GEDmatch, for the most part, is completely volunteer. You put your DNA profile on there. They don't do any sort of lab testing. It's all people who come together and they put their profile on. I'm not sure that people realize how vast we're talking here. Amazing. It doesn't mean that it has to be a near relative. It could be a relative that shares very little DNA with you, but the circumstances could come back
Yeah,
and show
tracing
up.
you back could be complicated, but it can
Not
be done,
impossible.
right?
And so I do think referencing DNA, even when you have, law enforcement restrictions on privacy, and which I am completely for, and I feel like you should opt in when you want things shared. But I'm just saying from my own personal experience, just because you opt out doesn't mean that you can't be traced.
Well, the other thing that's coming about, and I started to mention this, is once your DNA is into a database, for instance, Ancestry or 23andMe or any of the big like DNA databases, and someone puts their DNA into GEDmatch, if those people are matched to you, you're in that other database, whether you want it to be or not. And that's one of the, they're like, I hear all this stuff about, oh, I'm opted out of law enforcement. I promise you, if you have put your DNA out there, they're eventually going to find you, because it's just like these companies are still growing and they're still new. And Verigen is that's the forensic genomics company that now has GEDmatch under its umbrella. That company is very, very sophisticated, and what they are planning on doing with that, if you drill down and look at what they're doing, it's largely medical applications, and their company is growing. So they have no reason to let law enforcement concerns stand in their way of like using DNA to make for healthier people.
So when you have DNA in a system, you have DNA matches, okay? But there's also vital records matching that occur that has nothing to do with DNA that still links you to people, right? Your birth certificate, your death certificate,
Correct.
your things like that, okay? And so what I'm saying is a unidentified body's DNA being profiled. Okay, so they take something from the body, they get DNA from it. It is a profile of a person. They then turn around and they match it to somebody. And let's say it's a fourth cousin, right? So a fourth cousin is 4 generations back. They are a descendant of one of those siblings from your line. Okay. Yeah. So that would be quite a ways back, right? And that would involve quite a few people. But even opted out or not even having done a DNA profile, that match is still there and can still be discerned from somebody paying attention.
Correct.
Okay. So I'm saying like it doesn't even take you having DNA at all done or opting out or whatever. Like it is something that is truly out of the unidentified person or the perpetrator or whatever we're talking about here. It's out of their hands. I don't know that everybody's completely aware of how that works, but it's not, they couldn't definitively do it. They would still have to follow you and get a DNA sample. Or perhaps if it was serious enough, if it was a legal matter, perhaps they could get a warrant for it. I don't know. I'm just saying that the DNA aspect of criminal justice is huge. And it is not something that you're in complete control of.
Yeah, we don't have any autonomy over where our DNA is found or how it's tracked back to us. And that's how these cases are being solved right now, like the Golden State Killer and like these cases we described in 1986. Those cases are being solved because someone somewhere had their DNA in an Ancestry-style database, and familial DNA matches were made to go back to most of these guys. So these were, even if it's a one-off incident, those cases are still being solved. Just because these people are not in criminal databases or in CODIS doesn't mean they won't be found.
Right. And it is, it's stretching territories as far as, people's privacy.
Yeah,
But
legally,
I don't.
it's going to be sketchy for a while.
You know what, though? If somebody put their DNA on and they are genetically linked to you, like, how has your privacy been violated?
I don't come at it from that perspective, but see, the first thing that I think is going to happen I think over the next 5 years, I don't say the first thing, but the next 5 years, we're going to see an expansion of the types of DNA evidence that's tested. And you're going to get to the point that some of what is tested in these areas that have better resources, because that's the idea, is that the resources will come down in cost. And as that happens and DNA is more readily able to be tested and compared, which is complicated right now. And in some areas, it's very costly and it's very time limited, and they have to limit the number of items they can submit. Well, once that starts to disappear, then you're going to have people that are putting everything from a crime scene in. And that's where, finding it on a bottle of Mountain Dew from a, limited crime scene in 20 years ago is not going to be as exciting to me as the DNA that matched bodily fluids found at the scene or on the victim or under the fingernails. You're going to have to draw some hard and fast lines there. And I don't know, our court system took a very long time to catch up to technology. I think our court system has been grappling with DNA, but the more complicated familial DNA and touch DNA get, the more our court system is going to have to adapt to making sure that defendants continue to get fair trials and that convictions aren't made. Because trust me, if our court system can screw it up, it's going to figure out how to do it. And they are definitely going to be having problems with DNA in the next 20 years until they get it all sorted. And I'm being so optimistic by limiting that number to 20 years.
I kind of mixed in, because it all does mix together, but putting law enforcement and guilt or innocence aside, I feel like NamUs is a monumental step forward in, and the reason they did it was because it was such a problem. Missing people and unidentified bodies and unclaimed people, right? I'm not so sure that it actually wouldn't be cheaper to just figure out how to match the DNA than it would be to continue with NamUs's sort of I use NamUs all the time. I look at tons of things on there. It's a public resource. I like it. I find it interesting and helpful, but I don't know. I know it's not being utilized to its best capacity, because it's not like every law enforcement agency in the United States has a NamUs contact,
right,
in their department. And that's really what it would take, right?
Yeah. And I think it's going to get, what I was thinking of was more like when microDNA becomes a thing. MicroDNA means that the reduction of the more abundant base pairs in length and sequences are going to make matches faster. When they are able to do that more and more using microDNA, and that would be done with, I guess, microarrays. Now we're getting into territory where it's going to get boring quick if I keep talking, because it's going to sound very technical. But the truth is, when you can get down to where minimal base pairs can make DNA matches, you're going to have a lot of very complicated legal situations very quickly. And that's not going to matter how, whether there's a NamUs person, because I'm not talking about missing persons and unidentified persons. I'm talking about when state forensic crime labs are suddenly able to pair DNA from a robbery to a suspect down very quickly. Then you're going to have people who are on the scene of something being accused of it when really they were just there after or before.
Well, being able to identify the DNA doesn't change any aspect of what has to be proven guilty. It's just identifying more people.
When it comes to murders, that's completely true. But when you're shuffling through felony larcenies where they pulled touch DNA off of a gun, that's not true. Because they don't care. They just care that there was a match. And that's the other thing I don't think people understand about our courts.
The crime will still have to be proven.
I understand what you're saying, but at the most base level, in many jurisdictions around the country, trials take place in hours, not days.
And they're not even trials.
And
really.
if you're up for, say, and I'm using the robbery thing because that's an easy one. Say that you're up for 6 counts of robbery because somehow your DNA is on a gun or at a crime scene where a gun was found. So they're linking you to everything attached to that gun. It very rapidly could be that you're facing 60 years in prison because you threw a cigarette butt out at the wrong place 2 nights ago.
Right. I hope your phone pings you somewhere else.
Exactly. That's
what I can say. Like, get surveillance videos at your house that show when your vehicle is in the garage.
Crazy.
But okay, so you're right, and quite frankly, I feel like it could substantially change the rate of crime in that if you know any little thing is going to show up, right? You're less likely to be the perpetrator. Now, it doesn't change the fact that, people's DNA is everywhere.
Right.
And, in situations like you're talking about, it's going to change the dynamic of things. But, if your DNA is on something in the same amount as, 50 other people, and then you've got one person whose DNA was substantially more on there. I don't know how it will be handled, but somehow they will handle it. But I feel like a algorithm set up to cross-reference DNA as far as missing people and unidentified bodies goes, I think that would be way cheaper than
absolutely. And it eventually will do away with all the little nitpicky things we get into where it's a data entry error. It's a human mistake.
Right. And so, I don't want to say that DNA is error-free because it most certainly is not. And there is a lot of human interaction that occurs from, spitting to getting a profile, right? I mean, there's stuff that happens
right.
and people do it and mistakes can be made. And, I would just say, I know personally, I would never be pressured into pleading guilty to something I know I didn't do because they've got my DNA. I would, you've got to stand up for yourself and force the issue and, figure it out.
Right.
And it's scary though. It is a little scary because you think, oh my, but at the same time, cross one bridge at a time.
From Medium.com, the True Crime Edition, new DNA evidence used to solve 2 cold cases from 1986. Posted date August 17, 2020 by Megan Ashley. On March 26, 1986, 12-year-old Michaela Welch was babysitting her 2 younger sisters in Tacoma, Washington. Michaela had taken her sisters to a nearby park to play. Around noon, Michaela got on her bike to go home and make some sandwiches for the girls. While Michaela was gone, her sisters went to a nearby business to use the washroom. They also made a call home to check on their older sister, but no one picked up at the house. Michaela returned to the park and was unable to locate her sisters. She was last seen at 1:30 p.m. talking to an unidentified man. Her sisters returned to the park, waited, and when Michaela couldn't find them, they went back home and called police. Around 11 p.m., a tracking dog located Michaela's body in an isolated area more than a quarter-mile away from the park. Michaela had been raped and her throat had been slit. The initial suspect in the investigation was the man that Michaela had last spoken to in the park. A witness described the man as tanned, or possibly Hispanic, 25 to 35 years old, 5 feet 8 inches tall, with black hair and a possible mustache. Another suspect was a man seen in the park observing young girls. He was described as being in his mid-20s, 5 feet 9, skinny, and wearing dirty, ripped clothing. Police had composite sketches drawn up for both men, but neither could be identified. Police had also looked into a known child killer, David Fisher, but the police couldn't connect him to the crime area. At some point, he was arrested as a suspect in Michaela's murder, but was subsequently ruled out. Several months after Michaela's murder, murder, 13-year-old Jenny Bastian went missing while riding her bike in Defiance Park, only a few miles away from where McKellar went missing. Jenny was found 3 weeks later in the underbrush of a remote wooded area. She had also been sexually assaulted, but she was strangled. Due to similarities of the cases, it was presumed the perpetrator was the same man, but in 1986, DNA was still in its infancy. The DNA collected from McKellar was able to be tested, and although there were no matches based on what they had at the time, there was enough sample to continue testing throughout the years. In Jenny's case, because her body had been much harder to locate, the DNA had been too severely degraded to generate a profile. In 2013, the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children asked if Jenny's swimsuit could be tested for DNA. The bathing suit was sent in for testing and male DNA was found. DNA from McKellar's case was compared to the new sample, and cold case detectives were shocked to discover that they were two separate killers. The similarities in the cases were either a coincidence or the first murder had inspired the second. Copycat criminals were often seen after a highly publicized crime. In Jenny's case, her killer was identified as 61-year-old Robert Washburn. He was located in Illinois in 2017 and arrested. He had initially been a suspect in McKellar's murder, but there wasn't enough evidence to tie him to either girl's murders. He confessed and pleaded guilty, sparing her family from a trial. He was sentenced to 27 years in prison. For McKellar, although her murderer's DNA didn't appear to be in any databases, in 2016 police hired Parabon Nanolabs. Parabon specialized in genetic genealogy and creating reverse-engineered family trees, using genetic material from Ancestry.com or 23andMe. They are most notable for identifying the Golden State Killer. In 2018, Parabon was able to narrow the search down to two brothers. They lived in the area in 1986, and the older brother, Gary Hartman, had remained in the area his entire life. Gary would have been around 34 at the time of McKellar's murder. Police put both men under surveillance and observed Gary Hartman while he was in a restaurant. He used a napkin several times, and police later collected the napkin from the restaurant, and the police got a positive DNA match. They arrested the 66-year-old man the following day, more than 30 years after McKellar's murder. Gary Hartman had spent the last 2 decades working as a nurse, and he had worked at the Western State Hospital as a community nurse specialist. He was described as a family man with no formal complaints or criminal record. He has maintained his innocence and pleaded not guilty. He is awaiting trial, which was set to be held on January 30th, 2020, but has been delayed multiple times. There will likely be new information from the trial. Both Jenny and McKellar's cold cases are now considered to be solved. Jenny's mother, Patty Bastian, is now supporting legislation to expand the gathering of DNA to solve crimes in the state of Washington. She vows to continue fighting for stricter laws in her daughter's name.
This is 2 cases that you brought back to my attention. And they were, these were originally on Unsolved Mysteries, like the original Unsolved Mysteries.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, no, I gotcha, because it's in 1986. But here's sort of how I came upon them maybe like the first time. I don't really know. I don't know why I'm familiar with them, except that I do know at a certain point in time when we were researching Keys, I wanted to see what might have been available to him as far as reading about things in the paper. And so this happened in Tacoma. And so to sort of get into his head, I think that was my first exposure to these cases. So I literally went back into the 80s and early 90s, and I was looking in newspapers because the information we had about Keys indicated, they didn't have a television and they didn't, certain things that led me to say, hey, what was he reading about? And that ultimately, I feel like Ted Bundy was like a roadmap for him.
This is the case of Michelle Welch and also the case of Jenny Bastian. So it turns out that these 2 girls with strikingly similar cases were actually killed by 2 completely different dudes.
They were. So while I've been looking, I said earlier, while I've been looking at, which cases could possibly be related to one another, it came up. And, this is a case that I think anybody researching the 2 without any sort of conclusion, they would say, oh, it's so close together and time-wise and proximity-wise, this is the same guy. Right. I think it's a logical assessment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I like, the exception proving the rule, essentially. I like that this is, the opposite of that, because what ended up happening was Michelle went missing first, and there was there were tips that came in, and then Jennifer went missing, and there were tips that came in, and there was no resolution. They couldn't solve the case, but it was just automatically assumed that the two cases were related. Well, the perpetrator of Jennifer's kidnapping and murder, he had made a tip to Michelle's case. And
there's the weirdest thing.
It is so weird, but here's the kicker to me. I don't know if he was making a legitimate tip. I don't know if he was, because it seems like from now looking back, it looks like he was just trying to throw them off of his trail, right? That's what it looks like. Because he said he saw something with regard to the circumstances of Michelle's disappearance.
He said he saw a jogger running in the park who resembled the person they were looking for.
Okay, right. And so, a million years later, the cases still aren't solved. Once they finally did the DNA profiles, they realized that they were looking at two different suspects, which is, shocking. And because they just assumed the circumstances that it would be the same, it would be a matching profile from each crime scene. And once they figured out it was different, the investigators, my understanding was essentially they went from A to Z or 1 to 10 or whatever, every single male that had anything to do with anything about the case, which would include the guy that made the tip. They just got samples and started comparing them. And it just so happened that his matched for Jennifer's case.
Yeah, it is. It's creepy. So now officially, this started happening like 2016. They started the DNA examination. And the gist of it is over 2016, 2018, 2019, they have started putting these guys into court. And I believe Robert Washburn, he pled
Jennifer.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, he killed Jennifer Bastian.
And he showed remorse. He showed remorse because I believe her sister, maybe her older, I think she had an older sister, and her mom, I think they asked that he, like they said, look, don't put us through to try you. It's DNA match. And he took it into consideration and he pleaded guilty.
Right. And so the other killer was Gary Charles Hartman. He killed Michelle Welch.
Right. And, with Washburn, he did that to himself because it didn't show up as a hit like in the system in CODIS. He gave a sample of his DNA because his name was on Michelle's case. And so he voluntarily gave over the sample. But if he had not made that tip, they would have never known. They would have never known to ask.
He would have been forgotten about, in all honesty.
They wouldn't have known him at all.
Right. He could have faded into obscurity.
And so do you think that what happened with Michelle, and I don't know how quickly all that unfolded versus when Jennifer was taken, but do you think that he got inspiration, or whatever you call the negative side of inspiration, like to do that?
That is where I've been wondering about if Washburn drew from Hartman's crime for some reason, got something stuck in his head, or if either one of them, because this would have been the 80s. Like, so this happening in 1986, the way that it did, I wondered, was it influenced by the shenanigans of Ted Bundy? Because it's the same area, it's the same weird style, stranger abductions. Did they just go, why not? But the biggest thing I've wondered about guys like this, and Robert Charles Brown comes into play in all of this for me later. These guys, what else did they do? Washburn, I don't necessarily think he did anything else. I don't know. But Hartman, I'm not convinced that he is doing this for the first time.
Right. And so because, Washburn did show remorse, and he did what he did. And I thought to myself, well, did he just get an urge from what he was reading? And like, that really was it. Like, he just did that one thing. And, maybe he thought, oh, well, that person will get blamed for it or whatever. Right. I haven't been able to really I haven't been able to line up everything. Like, did he make the tip on Michelle after he had already killed Jennifer? Like, thinking he could throw off the investigation, or, whatever it was, whatever his thinking was, it backfired on him. But it did give me the impression overall that, like, that probably was the only thing he did, and he probably really regretted it. Of course, Jennifer was found in a fort, for lack of a better word. Like, it was like it was a clearing with
like an encampment.
Yeah. And it was weird. And I could actually totally see Keyes doing something like that. Now, this would be way too early for Keyes, but my first assessment of looking into these types of cases that happened in Washington in the 80s was just, what did he see in the newspaper, right? Like, what was he reading about? What was he, what was getting put into his head as a child?
Right.
And so this is one of those things. And, I wondered, but it really seemed like this was probably, Washburn's only crime, or maybe not only crime, but only murder. And like, how much does that suck for her?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really terrible.
Well, so we don't know what the outcome will be for Hartman yet. I think he has yet to go to trial. He pleaded not guilty. He's on the other side of things.
He must not understand how DNA works.
No, I don't think he does. And so we will be coming back to the Colorado Kid stuff. We've been trying to talk to some different family members about a couple of those cases. And I know you had one that you had put on the list, and I reached out to the family as well. Once we get done with those kids, we'll be moving into like the adult side of things, like right before the summer starts. And then I'm going to start to, hopefully, by the time the summer gets kicking, I can start to map out the serial killer thing that I'm thinking of. And maybe you can have a perspective. Maybe it'll help you see what I'm trying to do. And that way you and the audience can come along and I don't just sound like a crazy person. But we are going to be taking a couple of weeks off right now. We're going to take off the week of March 28th is going to be some downtime for us. And then the following week, the first week of April, will be some downtime. So we're going to work on some of these kids' cases in that time, but we won't be publishing any podcast until after the week of April the 7th. So when we come back from that, and that's so I can work on a different project right now, and our children have spring breaks and things like that are going on.
This episode was edited to keep in mind the location that we've been working in this year. And we'd like to let the families of Eric Talley, Ricky Olds, Denny Strong, Jody Waters, Terry Leaker, Lynn Murray, Suzanne Fountain, Kevin Mahoney, Trelona Bartkowiak, and Nevin Stanisic, that we are thinking of them and sending them good thoughts.
Thanks for joining us. You can reach us at 252-365-5593 or at truecrimexcess.com or truecrimexcess@gmail.com if you want to send us a note. This episode was brought to you by LabrottieCreations.com. That's LABROTTIECREATIONS.com. Check out the merchandise and specifically their fun Pop Pet art custom pieces made from photos of your very own pets. Use the promo code CRIMEXS, that's CRIMEXS, for 20% off a fun, brightly colored, happy piece of art of your own pet at their site,
at BrodyCreations.com. Music in this episode was licensed for True Crime XS. The theme song was Indestructible by Noah Smith. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform or at TeePublic, Instagram, or Twitter. You can also join us on Patreon to fund future body exploration trips. But the best thing you can do for us is leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform and share us with your friends. And we'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
To say that it was obvious is wrong. I never even knew I could feel this much. To say you went and planned it all along. No, you're never meant to take my breath away. The two of us went walking both alone. I caught a glimpse and ever since, hand in hand, on and on. How'd I know you'd be the one? Now I'll never waste another day. No, no, no. Your love hit me all at once, yeah. Knocked out, now I am done. Ooh, shining like the midnight sun, yeah. Your love hit me all at once. Who knew I could fall and feel no fear? Living in a rooftop world is so brand new and real. Way up high, clouds disappear. And no, I didn't plan to see you this way. No, no, no. Your love hit me all at once, yeah. Knocked out, now I am done. Ooh, shining like the midnight sun, yeah. Your love hit me all
It's a little weird time-wise to be in the genre of whatever you want to call it, journalism or entertainment or whatever it is that podcasting about true crime is doing when there's multiple mass shootings. It's very hard sometimes to have joy in life. And we've got there's a project that I've been working on even longer than my research into Israel Keys, was years now. And it's finally sort of all fell into place and it's coming to fruition. And it's hard to enjoy that because of the things that happen when there's mass shootings and there's so many families that are affected. It's just a very interesting time that we live in.